The old farmhouse sat quietly on 15 acres of Montana land, its windows glowing warm against the cold December night. Inside, David worked alone in his workshop, the sound of sandpaper against wood filling the silence. At 42, he had grown comfortable with the quiet. Too comfortable, some might say. 8 years had passed since his divorce, and David still remembered every painful detail. The lawyers, the arguments, the way his ex-wife looked at him like he was a stranger. She had remarried quickly and moved across the country, taking their daughter Katie with her. Now Katie was almost 16, and their phone calls were getting shorter each month. She was busy with her own life, her own friends, her own world. That didn't include him. The workshop had become his sanctuary. Here, surrounded by tools his grandfather had left him, David could lose himself in creating something beautiful from rough wood. Tonight, he was working on a rocking chair for Katie's birthday. Each curve was perfect, each joint fitted with care. It was the kind of gift that took months to make, the kind that showed love even when words failed. His dog Buddy, an old border collie with gray around his muzzle, lay sleeping by the small heater. The dog had been his only real companion for years now. Sometimes David talked to him while he worked, telling him about his day or sharing memories of when Katie was small. Buddy always listened without judgment, never asking for more than food and a warm place to sleep. The farmhouse had been in David's family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built it with his own hands back in the 1940s, and David's father had maintained it until his death 5 years ago. Now it was David's responsibility, this old house with its creaking floors and stubborn plumbing. Most days, he loved the solitude it offered. Other days, the silence felt heavy. Mrs. Chun, his neighbor who lived 2 miles down the road, often worried about him. She was 83 and had been widowed for over a decade, but she still found time to check on David. She would bring him homemade soup and scold him gently about spending too much time alone. "You're still young," she would say, shaking her head. "You should be living, not just existing." But David had tried living once. He had believed in love, in partnership, in building a future with someone. The failure of his marriage had left scars that ran deeper than he cared to admit. His ex-wife had accused him of being emotionally distant, of caring more about his work than his family. Maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't meant for relationships. The weather forecast had been warning about a major storm for days. The meteorologist on the radio spoke of record-breaking cold, of winds that could knock down power lines, of snow that might trap people in their homes for days. David had prepared carefully, stocking up on food, firewood, and supplies. He had checked the generator twice and made sure Buddy had enough food and medicine for his arthritis as he worked on the rocking chair. David thought about Katie's last visit during summer vacation. She had seemed different, more grown up, more distant. She spent most of her time on her phone, texting friends back home. When he tried to show her the furniture he was making, she had seemed polite but uninterested. The gap between them felt wider each year, and David didn't know how to bridge it. The truth was, he had stopped trying to bridge gaps with people. After the divorce, after losing daily contact with his daughter, after watching his friends pair off and start families while he remained alone, David had built walls around his heart. It was easier this way, safer. He couldn't be hurt if he didn't let anyone close enough to hurt him. His workshop was filled with pieces he had made over the years. A dining table that had never hosted a family dinner. Bookshelves that held only his own books. A beautiful jewelry box with no one to give it to. Each piece was crafted with skill and care, but they all served as reminders of the life he might have had. Outside, the wind was beginning to pick up. David could hear it whistling around the corners of the house, rattling the windows in their frames. Buddy lifted his head, ears alert to the changing weather. Dogs always seemed to sense storms before humans did. David set down his sandpaper and looked at the rocking chair. It was nearly finished, smooth and strong, built to last for generations. He had chosen cherry wood for its warm color and carved small flowers along the headrest. remembering how Katie used to love picking wildflowers when she was little. He wondered if she would even remember those days, or if they had become just another childhood memory she had outgrown. The radio crackled with another weather update. The storm was moving faster than expected, bringing with it temperatures that could be dangerous for anyone caught outside. David was grateful for his solid house, for the warmth of his workshop, for the simple pleasure of working with his hands while the world outside prepared to turn harsh and unforgiving. He had chosen this solitary life, or perhaps it had chosen him. Either way, he had made peace with it. He had his work, his dog, his quiet routines. He had learned not to hope for more, not to dream about second chances or unexpected changes. Life was what it was, and wanting more only led to disappointment. As the first snowflakes began to fall outside his workshop window, David covered the rocking chair with a soft cloth and gathered his tools. Tomorrow would bring the storm in full force, and he would spend it safe and warm inside his grandfather's house, waiting for it to pass. It was a good life, he told himself, a peaceful life, a life where his heart stayed protected behind walls he had built strong and high. But sometimes, late at night when the house was too quiet and Buddy was sleeping, David wondered what might happen if those walls ever came down. He wondered if he would be brave enough to let someone in again, or if he would spend the rest of his days alone with his beautiful furniture and his careful, guarded heart. Tonight, as the storm gathered strength outside, he thought he knew the answer. Some walls were built too strong to ever fall. The blizzard hit with a fury that surprised even the weather forecasters. David woke on the second morning to find snow piled 3 feet high against his windows and wind that seemed to shake the very foundations of his grandfather's old house. The power had gone out sometime during the night, but his wood stove kept the main rooms warm enough that he made coffee on the camp stove. He kept for emergencies and listened to his battery radio. The roads were completely blocked. The county had called off all rescue operations until the storm passed. Anyone stuck outside would have to wait for help, assuming they could survive the cold that long. The temperature had dropped to minus 15 degrees, and with the wind, it felt much colder. Buddy was restless, pacing between the kitchen and the front door with an energy the old dog rarely showed anymore. His arthritis usually kept him moving slowly, but something had him agitated. He kept whining and pawing at the door, asking to go outside despite the howling wind. "Not today, boy," David said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Even you're not tough enough for this weather." But Buddy wouldn't settle down. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then ran to the window that faced the tool shed. David followed, peering through the glass into the white chaos outside. He couldn't see much beyond a few feet, but Buddy was acting like something was wrong. Very wrong. The dog's barking became more frantic. He scratched at the back door, then ran back to David, then back to the door again. In all the years they had been together, David had never seen Buddy act this way. The old dog was trying to tell him something important. Against his better judgment, David pulled on his heaviest coat, wrapped a scarf around his face, and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. The wind was so strong he had to lean against it just to stay upright. Snow whipped around him, making it impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. Buddy pushed past him and disappeared into the white. David followed the sound of barking, his boots sinking deep into the drifted snow. Each step was a struggle. The cold was already numbing his face despite the scarf, and he could feel it seeping through his thick gloves. Near the tool shed, Buddy was digging frantically at something in the snow. At first, David thought it might be a fallen branch or some debris blown by the wind, but as he got closer, his heart stopped. It wasn't debris at all. It was a person. A young woman lay half buried in the snowdrift that had formed against the side of his shed. She was wearing jeans and a thin jacket, completely wrong for this kind of weather. Her dark hair was covered with ice, and her lips were blue. She wasn't moving. David dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. She was alive, but barely. Her skin was cold as marble, and she wasn't shivering anymore, which he knew was a bad sign. When people stopped shivering in extreme cold, it meant their body was shutting down Dot without thinking about his own safety. David lifted her into his arms. She was small and light, but carrying her through the deep snow while fighting the wind was like wrestling with nature itself. Every step back to the house felt like a mile. His lungs burned from breathing the freezing air, and his muscles ached from the effort. But he didn't stop. Buddy ran ahead, as if showing him the way back to safety. Inside the house, David laid her on the couch closest to the wood stove. Her clothes were soaked through and freezing. He knew from first aid training that he needed to get her warm, but carefully. Warming someone with severe hypothermia too quickly could cause their heart to stop. He peeled off her wet jacket and shoes, then wrapped her in every blanket he could find. Her hands were white and waxy, showing signs of frostbite. He filled hot water bottles and placed them carefully around her body, not directly against her skin, but close enough to provide gentle warmth. For 20 minutes, she didn't respond at all. David sat beside her, checking her pulse regularly and talking to her even though she couldn't hear him. He told her she was safe now, that everything would be okay, that she just needed to fight a little longer. He found himself praying for the first time in years. Then, slowly, she began to shiver. It started as small tremors, then became violent, shaking that made her whole body convulse. David knew this was actually good news. Shivering meant her body was trying to warm itself again. Her eyes fluttered open about an hour later. They were brown, confused, and filled with pain. She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper that he couldn't understand. Her lips were still pale, but they weren't blue anymore. "Don't try to talk yet," David said softly. "You're safe. You're in my house. I found you outside in the snow." She looked around the room with unfocused eyes, taking in the wood stove, the simple furniture, the dog who was now lying protective guard beside the couch. Slowly, understanding crept into her expression. "My car," she whispered, her voice rough and painful. "I was driving to town. The road. I couldn't see." David brought her warm tea, helping her sit up just enough to take small sips. She winced with each movement, and he could see that her fingers were swollen and painful from the cold. "I'm Aina," she managed to say between sips of tea. "I was trying to get to the hospital in town. I'm supposed to start work there next week. You're a nurse?" David asked, and she nodded weakly as the warmth slowly returned to her body. Aina was able to tell him more of her story. She had been driving from Colorado, where her temporary assignment had ended. All her belongings were in her car, which was now buried somewhere along the country road. She had walked for what felt like hours, looking for help before the cold became too much. "I thought I was going to die out there," she admitted, her voice still shaky. "I couldn't feel my hands or feet anymore. I saw your shed and just ... I don't remember much after that." David studied her face as she spoke. Even pale and exhausted from her ordeal, there was something about her that caught his attention. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her voice, or the way she thanked him without making a big show of it. She didn't seem like someone who expected to be rescued. Outside, the storm continued to rage with no sign of stopping. The radio announced that the roads would likely be impassable for several days. David realized that this stranger, this woman who had literally fallen into his carefully ordered life, would need to stay until the weather cleared. For the first time in 8 years, his house would have another person in it. The thought should have made him uncomfortable, should have made him want to find some other solution. Instead, as he watched Aina slowly recover by his fire, with Buddy keeping watch beside her, David felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. He felt needed. The storm raged for 5 long days, trapping David and Aina together in the old farmhouse. What started as an awkward situation between strangers slowly transformed into something neither of them had expected. On the first full day, Aina was still weak from her ordeal. She slept most of the time, curled up on the couch with Buddy keeping watch beside her. David found himself checking on her every hour, bringing her hot soup and making sure she stayed warm. He had never been much of a caregiver, but something about her quiet gratitude made him want to help. "You don't have to keep fussing over me," Aina said on the second day, managing a small smile. "I'm a nurse, remember? I know when I'm getting better." But David noticed she still moved carefully, and her fingers were still tender from the frostbite. He had wrapped them gently in soft bandages, and she had been impressed by how well he handled the first aid. "Where did you learn to treat hypothermia?" she asked. "My dad was a volunteer firefighter," David explained. "He taught me basic emergency care when I was young. Said you never know when you might need to help someone." As Aina recovered, she began to move around the house more. She insisted on helping with cooking, despite David's protest that she was still his patient. She found his small kitchen charming, with its old-fashioned cabinets and cast-iron pans. "This reminds me of my grandmother's house," she said, running her hand along the worn wooden countertop. "She taught me to cook when I was little. Said a person who can feed themselves well will never truly be helpless." Aina made the best scrambled eggs David had ever tasted, seasoning them with herbs she found in his neglected spice rack. She turned his basic canned soup into something that actually had flavor, and she somehow made coffee that was better than what he usually managed. "You've been eating like a bachelor," she teased gently. "When was the last time you had a real meal?" David thought about it and realized he couldn't remember. Since his divorce, he had gotten into the habit of eating whatever was easy. Sandwiches, frozen dinners, cereal for supper sometimes. He had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care whether he ate well. On the third day, Buddy started limping badly. The old dog had been favoring his right front leg, and Aina noticed immediately. She knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she examined his paw. "He's got something stuck between his toes," she said. "Probably a piece of ice from when he was outside. Help him find me." David had tried to look at Buddy's paw earlier, but the dog had been too anxious to let him. With Aina, however, Buddy seemed to sense she wanted to help. He sat still while she carefully removed a chunk of ice and some small stones. "There we go, sweet boy," she murmured, massaging his paw gently. "That must feel so much better." Watching Aina with his dog, David felt something shift inside his chest. She had the same gentle touch with Buddy that she probably used with her patients. There was something deeply caring about her that went beyond professional training. "He likes you," David observed. "Animals are good judges of character," Aina replied, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "If your dog trusts someone, it usually means they're worth trusting." That evening, Aina discovered David's workshop. She had been restless from being cooped up inside and had wandered through the house while he was outside checking the generator. When he came back in, he found her standing in front of his workbench, staring at the nearly finished rocking chair. "Did you make this?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. David felt embarrassed suddenly. "It's just a hobby. Something to keep my hands busy." But Aina was running her fingers along the smooth wood, admiring the carved flowers on the headdress. "This isn't just a hobby. This is beautiful. This is art." She walked around the workshop, looking at his other pieces. The dining table, the bookshelves, the jewelry box. Her appreciation was genuine, not the polite interest people sometimes showed when they didn't really understand craftsmanship. "Who is the rocking chair for?" she asked. "My daughter," David said quietly. "She'll be 16 next month. I hoped she might like it." Aina heard something in his voice, some sadness he was trying to hide. "You miss her." It wasn't a question. And David found himself talking about Katie in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. He told Aina about the divorce, about how far away his daughter lived, about how their relationship had grown distant. "She's growing up without me," he said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just some guy who sends birthday presents and Christmas cards." Aina listened without judgment, the way she probably listened to her patients when they needed to talk about their fears. 16 is a hard age, she said finally. Kids that age are figuring out who they are, and sometimes that means pulling away from their parents. It doesn't mean she doesn't love you. On the fourth day, Aina asked if she could help him work on the rocking chair. David was hesitant at first. His workshop was his private space, the place where he went to be alone with his thoughts. But something about the way she had looked at his work made him want to share it with someone who could appreciate what he was trying to create. He showed her how to sand the wood, how to feel for rough spots with her fingertips, how to work with the grain instead of against it. Aina was a quick learner, and her hands were steady from years of medical training. "This is so peaceful," she said as they worked side by side. "I can see why you love doing this." They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives in a way that felt natural and easy. Aina told him about her job as a traveling nurse, how she had been moving from place to place since her fiancé had died in an accident 3 years ago. "I couldn't stay in one place after that," she explained. "Everything reminded me of him. It was easier to keep moving, to help people, and then leave before I got too attached." David understood that impulse. After his divorce, he had wanted to run too, but he had been tied to this place by family history and his daughter's visits. "Do you ever get lonely?" he asked. Aina was quiet for a moment, focusing on the piece of wood in her hands. "All the time," she admitted. But lonely felt safer than hurt. As they worked together, David noticed small things about Aina, the way she hummed softly when she was concentrating, how she always thanked him for small kindnesses, like bringing her coffee or adjusting the heat in the workshop, the way she smiled when Buddy brought her his favorite toy. On the 5th morning, they woke to silence. The wind had finally stopped howling. When David looked outside, he could see blue sky for the first time in days. The storm was over. Aina stood beside him at the window, and they both knew this meant she would be leaving soon. The roads would be clear within a day or two. She would retrieve her car, continue to her new job, and return to her traveling life. "I should call the hospital," she said quietly. "Let them know I'm all right." But neither of them moved from the window. The thought of saying goodbye felt heavier than either wanted to admit. In 5 days, they had created something unexpected in this old house. They had found companionship, understanding, and the beginning of something that felt like it could be more. For the first time in years, David's house had felt like a home. And for the first time since her fiancé's death, Aina had felt like she belonged somewhere. The question now was whether they were brave enough to explore what might happen if she stayed. The silence after the storm felt strange. For 5 days, the wind had been their constant companion, howling around the house like a living thing. Now, with only the gentle sound of melting snow dripping from the roof, the world seemed almost too quiet. David and Aina stood at the kitchen window, watching the county snowplow work its way down the main road in the distance. The sight filled them both with mixed emotions. Freedom meant Aina could leave, but it also meant their time together was coming to an end. "I should try to find my car," Aina said, but her voice lacked enthusiasm. They bundled up and walked down David's long driveway to where it met the country road. The storm had changed the landscape completely. What had been familiar landmarks were now buried under massive drifts of snow. Power lines were down in several places, and tree branches littered the road. About half a mile from David's house, they found Aina's car. It was buried so deep in snow that only the top of the roof was visible. The vehicle had slid sideways into a ditch and was now completely trapped. "Oh no," Aina whispered, staring at the buried car. Everything she owned was inside that vehicle. Her clothes, her books, her medical supplies, the few photos she had of her family, her laptop with years of work documents, her grandmother's jewelry box. All of it was now under tons of snow and ice. David could see the panic starting to build in her eyes. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "We'll get it out. It might take a few days, but we'll get it out." But when the tow truck finally arrived, 2 days later, The news wasn't good. The car had been damaged by the impact and the weight of the snow. The engine was flooded, the windshield was cracked, and the frame was bent. The mechanic, an older man named Joe, who had been fixing cars in the area for 30 years, shook his head as he looked at the damage. "I can fix her," Joe said, "but it's going to take time. 2 weeks, maybe 3. And it's going to cost more than the car is worth." Ana's face went pale. She had been counting on this job at the hospital to help her rebuild her savings. She couldn't afford expensive car repairs, and she certainly couldn't afford to buy a new vehicle. What about the hospital job? David asked. Ana pulled out her phone and called the hospital with shaking hands. David watched her face fall as she spoke to someone on the other end. When she hung up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "They gave the position to someone else," she said quietly. "Someone who could start immediately. They said they understand about the storm, but they can't hold the job any longer." David felt his heart break for her. In the span of 10 minutes, Ana had lost her transportation, her job, and her security. She was stranded in a place where she knew no one except him. "What will you do?" he asked. Ana sat down heavily on his front porch steps, staring at her broken car in the distance. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some savings, but not enough to fix the car and find a new place to live and look for another job. I've been living paycheck to paycheck for the past few years." They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. David found himself thinking about how quiet his house would be when Ana left, how empty it would feel after having someone to talk to, someone to cook with, someone who appreciated his work and understood his love for his daughter. "You could stay here," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the words. Ana looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could stay here while you figure things out. The guest room is just sitting empty anyway, and you could help me around the place. I've been meaning to fix up the old cabin out back. You could live there if you wanted privacy." Ana stared at him. "David, I can't just move in with you. We barely know each other." "I know," he said, running his hands through his hair. "But I also know that you're kind and hardworking, and that you make this place feel like a home. I know that Buddy loves you, and that you can cook better than I ever could. I know that you understand why I spend so much time in my workshop, and you don't make me feel guilty about it." He paused, gathering courage for what he wanted to say next. "And I know that the local clinic has been looking for a nurse for months. Dr. Peterson has been running that place single-handed, and he's getting too old to keep doing everything himself." Ana's eyes widened. "You think they would hire me?" "I think they'd be lucky to have you," David said honestly. "Dr. Peterson is a good man. He's delivered half the babies in this county and patched up the other half when they got into trouble. But he needs help, and you need a job." The possibility hung in the air between them. Ana could see the sense in what David was suggesting, but it scared her. For 3 years, she had been careful not to put down roots anywhere. Moving from place to place had been her way of protecting herself from getting hurt again. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked quietly. "Then you leave," David said simply. "No hard feelings, no pressure. You stay as long as it feels right. And when it doesn't feel right anymore, you go." That afternoon, they drove into town together in David's pickup truck. The small town looked like something from a Christmas card, with its main street lined with old buildings and snow still piled high on the sidewalks. Dr. Peterson's clinic was in a converted house at the end of Main Street, and the elderly doctor greeted them with obvious relief when David explained the situation. "A real nurse?" Dr. Peterson said, his eyes lighting up. "With hospital experience, my dear, you be an answer to prayer. I've been doing this alone for 5 years now, ever since my last nurse moved to the city." He offered Ana the job on the spot, with a salary that was lower than what she would have made at the hospital, but enough to live on comfortably in a small town. The work would be varied, everything from routine checkups to emergency care, from helping with minor surgeries to running the clinic's small pharmacy. "I'll need to think about it," Ana said, though David could see she was tempted. On the drive back to the farm, Ana was quiet. David didn't push her for a decision, but he found himself hoping she would say yes. The thought of going back to his solitary life felt unbearable now that he had experienced what it was like to share his space with someone who understood him. That evening, they worked together in his workshop, putting the finishing touches on Katie's rocking chair. Ana had suggested adding a small carved heart on the back, hidden where only someone sitting in the chair would see it. "She'd know you made it with love," Ana said, as David carefully carved the tiny heart dot as they worked. Ana talked about her fears. "I've been running for 3 years," she said. "Always moving, never staying long enough to get attached to places or people. It felt safer that way." "And now?" David asked. "Now I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of staying, but of wanting to stay. What if I let myself care about this place, about this job, about ... quote. She paused, not finishing the sentence. "About me?" David asked gently. Ana nodded, her cheeks reddening slightly. "I can see myself being happy here, really happy. And that terrifies me." David set down his carving tools and looked at her directly. "I've been alone for 8 years," he said. "I told myself I was better off that way, that I didn't need anyone. But these past few days with you here, I've remembered what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing." They stood facing each other in the warm light of the workshop. Surrounded by the furniture David had made with his own hands, the smell of wood shavings and polish in the air. The moment felt fragile and important, like something that could change both their lives forever. "What are you asking me?" Ana whispered. "I'm asking you to take a chance," David said. "On this place, on the job, on me. I'm asking you to stop running and see what happens if you stay in one place long enough to call it home." Ana looked around the workshop, at the careful craftsmanship that surrounded them, at the rocking chair they had finished together. She thought about Dr. Peterson's kind eyes and the way the small town had felt welcoming despite its unfamiliarity. She thought about Buddy, who had claimed her as his second favorite person in the world. Most of all, she thought about David, this quiet man who had saved her life and then opened his heart to her with a courage that humbled her. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll stay." Ana's decision to stay changed everything, yet somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. David spent the next few weeks fixing up the old cabin behind his house, working with an energy he hadn't felt in years. Ana helped when she could, learning to use power tools and paint trim while she waited for her official start date at the clinic. The cabin was small but charming, with 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace. David's grandfather had built it as a guest house back in the 1950s, but it had been empty for years. Together, they cleaned decades of dust, repaired loose floorboards, and hung new curtains that Ana picked out during their trips to town. "It's perfect," Ana said on the day she officially moved in. "I've never had a place that felt so much like home." Dr. Peterson welcomed Ana with open arms. The clinic was busier than she had expected for such a small town, serving not just the local residents, but also people from surrounding farms and ranches. Ana quickly proved herself invaluable, handling everything from treating cuts and bruises to assisting with emergency procedures. "You're a godsend," Dr. Peterson told her after her first week. "I forgot how much easier this job is when you have someone competent to share the load." Ana loved the work, unlike her hospital jobs, where she often felt like just another face in a large institution. Here she got to know her patients personally. She learned their names, their families, their stories. Mrs. Chum brought her homemade cookies. The local pharmacist shared gossip about town politics. Even the grumpy old rancher who complained about everything seemed to soften when Ana treated his chronic back pain with gentle competence. David found himself looking forward to evenings when Ana would walk over from her cabin to have dinner with him. She would tell him about her day at the clinic while he shared stories about his latest woodworking projects. They fell into an easy routine that felt like they had been doing it for years instead of weeks. The real test came in March when Katie called to say she wanted to spend her spring break with David instead of going on a beach trip with friends. "She's coming here?" Aina asked when David told her the news. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," David admitted. "It's been so long since we've spent real time together. And now with you here. I don't know how she'll react to finding out I have someone in my life." Aina understood his concern. She had grown close to David over the past few months, but Katie was his daughter. If the 16-year-old didn't approve of their relationship, Aina knew it could complicate everything. When Katie arrived, she was taller than David remembered and more serious. She hugged him politely but seemed distracted, more interested in her phone than in catching up. David's heart sank as he realized the distance between them had grown even wider. "So who's the woman living in Grandpa's old cabin?" Katie asked over dinner their first night. David had planned to ease into the subject, but Katie had apparently spotted Aina walking back from work. "Her name is Aina. She's a nurse at the clinic in town. She single quotes S. Well, she's become a good friend." Katie raised an eyebrow at the word friend, but didn't comment further. The next morning, David was surprised to find Katie in his workshop, examining the rocking chair he had made for her birthday. "Is this really for me?" she asked, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Happy 16th birthday," David said. "I know it's early, but I wanted you to see it." For the first time since she had arrived, Katie smiled genuinely. "Dad, this is incredible. I had no idea you could make something like this." They spent the morning in the workshop together, with David showing Katie how different tools worked and explaining the various types of wood he used. She seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and even trying her hand at sanding a small piece of maple. "I never really understood what you did out here," Katie admitted. "Mom always said you care more about your workshop than your family." David felt a stab of pain at his ex-wife's words, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "The workshop was where I came when I missed you," he said quietly. "Every piece I made, I was thinking about you growing up without me around." Katie looked at him with new understanding. "I missed you too, Dad. I just didn't know how to say it." That afternoon, Aina returned from work to find Katie sitting on her cabin porch, clearly waiting for her. "So you're my dad's friend," Katie said, making air quotes around the word friend. Aina sat down beside her, not sure what to expect. "I suppose I am. Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet," Katie said honestly. "He seems different since you've been here. Happier, I guess. But I need to know if you're going to hurt him." The directness of the question surprised Aina. This wasn't the sulky teenager she had expected, but a young woman who was protective of her father. "I hope not," Aina said carefully. "I care about your dad very much. But I understand if you're worried about someone new being in his life." Katie studied Aina's face for a long moment. "He's been alone for a really long time. Mom remarried when I was 10, and sometimes I felt guilty about that, like I was choosing her new family over him." Aina's heart went out to this girl who was clearly carrying burdens too heavy for her age. "Love isn't a competition," she said gently. "You loving your mom and stepfather doesn't take anything away from your relationship with your dad." Over the next few days, Aina watched Katie slowly open up to her father. The girl was curious about everything: David's woodworking, Aina's nursing stories, even Buddy's favorite hiding spots around the property. She helped Aina plant a small vegetable garden behind the cabin and learned to cook David's favorite cornbread. The breakthrough moment came when Katie mentioned she was interested in photography but couldn't afford a good camera. "I have one you could borrow," Aina offered. "I used to take pictures during my travels, but I haven't touched it in months." Aina dug out her camera equipment and spent an afternoon teaching Katie the basics of composition and lighting. Katie had a natural eye for finding beauty in ordinary things, the way sunlight filtered through the workshop windows. Buddy's sleeping in a patch of warm grass, her father's hands carefully shaping a piece of wood. "You're really good at this," Aina told her as they reviewed the photos on the camera's display. "Really?" Katie beamed with pride. "I've always wanted to try photography, but Mom says it's not a practical career choice." "Maybe not," Aina said. "But sometimes we need to do things that feed our souls, not just things that pay the bills." On Katie's last evening, the three of them sat on David's front porch watching the sunset. Katie was editing photos on Aina's laptop while David and Aina talked quietly about their plans for the summer. "I want to come back for the whole summer," Katie announced suddenly. "If that's okay with both of you." David's face lit up. "Of course. It's okay. Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure," Katie said. "I want to learn more about woodworking, and Aina promised to teach me how to develop film in a real darkroom. Plus, someone needs to make sure you two don't get too weird living out here by yourselves." Aina laughed at that, and even David chuckled. The tension that had existed at the beginning of the week was completely gone, replaced by something that felt remarkably like family. After Katie left for school, David and Aina found their relationship shifting into something deeper and more committed. They had passed the test of including his daughter in their life, and it had brought them closer together, rather than driving them apart. In May, David surprised Aina by asking her to help him design an addition to his house, a sunroom where she could read and he could display some of his furniture. Working on the plans together felt like planning a future, something neither of them had dared to hope for just a few months earlier. The proposal came on a warm October evening, exactly 1 year after Aina had been found freezing by David's shed. They were sitting by the fireplace in his living room, Aina reading while David worked on a small jewelry box. "I have something for you," David said, setting down his tools. The jewelry box was made from the same cherry wood as Katie's rocking chair, with delicate hinges and a tiny heart carved on the lid. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a simple gold ring. "It's not fancy," David said, suddenly nervous. "But I made the box myself, and I chose the ring because it reminded me of you, beautiful but not flashy, strong enough to last forever." Aina looked at the ring, then at David's hopeful face, then at the warm house around them that had become their shared home. "Are you asking me to marry you?" she whispered. "I'm asking you to stop running," David said. "I'm asking you to build a life here with me and Katie and Buddy and whatever family we create together. I'm asking you to let me love you for the rest of our lives." Aina thought about the scared, frozen woman who had stumbled into David's yard a year ago. That woman had been running from pain, afraid to trust, convinced that love only led to loss. The woman she was now had learned that home wasn't a place, but the people who chose to stay and build something beautiful together. "Yes," she said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Yes to all of it." Their wedding the following spring was small and perfect, held in David's workshop, surrounded by the furniture they had built together and the friends they had made in their small town. Katie served as Aina's maid of honor, taking pictures throughout the ceremony with the professional camera Aina had bought her for Christmas.